So if I went to law school back in the grand old BCU days, before Christ University, this would be one of my textbooks. What follows are my initial thoughts and reactions to this book of the Bible. I have not done any outside research regarding the more challenging or problematic passages of Christian scripture. Therefore, do not take whatever criticisms I may make in this video as my final word on the passage or verse in question. I am very likely going to be doing a Bible Revisited series addressing my different issues with the Bible, book by book, after conducting ample outside research. So now, without further ado, let's jump into the review. So the book of Leviticus is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it is basically the book of laws. There's a lot of laws. It's Jewish law, Jewish moral law, also just, a bunch of specifications for how to perform different ceremonies, what to do, what not to do. It's basically like a law book. As I said in the intro, if I was a lawyer, I guess a Jewish lawyer, this would be the book. This would be one of the books I would read back during that time. And yeah, I overall, honestly, I gotta say, reading Leviticus, I went into it expecting to be really, I went into it expecting to walk out freaked out, because there's been a lot said about the book of about Levitical law and the book of Leviticus in general that has not sounded good from the outside. I've read Leviticus when I was much younger and I didn't understand any of it, but now that I'm older, reading through it, it did not shock me as much as I thought it was going to. In fact, I overall really liked Leviticus. There are some passages and parts of the book of Leviticus that definitely are challenging to me, and I need to investigate further into them, because some of them are quite, a little just bizarre and a little unsettling. The fact that they're in the Bible, but overall, the book of Leviticus was not the dun 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 of the Bible, as people had made it out to be. So now that I've given you my overall thoughts, let's just go ahead and jump into the analysis and review, discussion, whatever you want to call it, of the different passages in the book of Leviticus that I highlighted that were either beautiful or kind of scary or kind of, I don't know what the heck this is. Good? All right. First of all, I would just like to say, the first 10 chapters of this book, I kind of skimmed through, because there's a whole lot of just stuff that doesn't apply to today. Like just all the Jewish priest customs and, what you do in the tabernacle, what do you do to sacrifice, all this stuff. Stuff that's no longer practiced. And so it was kind of interesting to read, but I don't really remember any of it, except for that I didn't feel like I needed to know much of it. Chapter 11 is where things get pretty interesting. So chapter 11 of Leviticus has to do with, can you eat pork? No. Can you eat this animal? No. Can you eat this animal? Yes. It has to do everything to do with just what food you can eat, whether it's birds, reptiles, just pigs, whatever it may be. It's a distinction between what is a clean animal and what is an unclean animal. What is an animal that you can, hang out with and eat, and what is an animal that you must stay away from and not eat. And it's very interesting, because I know, some people have theorized that the reason, for instance, it says don't eat pigs, don't eat pork, is because we didn't know how to cure pork back then. And if you did eat it, you'd probably die or you get sick. And we just didn't know how to prepare pork very well at all. It was dangerous. It was a dangerous animal to try and eat back then, because we didn't know how to prepare it. Obviously nowadays, we do know how to prepare it. But it's an interesting theory. And, it's whatever. But this whole chapter was kind of a little odd to me, because it said, the distinction between what animals you could eat and not eat didn't always make sense. Now, for pigs back then, makes sense. You don't want to eat something that kills you, poisons you. And maybe that's the same thing for a lot of these other animals back then. I doubt it, though. It says that rabbits are unclean. Don't eat them. Don't touch their carcasses and stuff. And I'm like, rabbits? Rabbits? I know a lot of people don't want, to kill rabbits and eat rabbits just because they're so cute. But I'm going to confess to you, I've got 2 rabbit pelts on my wall over there. So I've eaten rabbits, and rabbits are great meat, and I prepared my rabbit meat pretty simply. I didn't have to do anything to the meat, and I'm fine. And so I don't know why rabbit is considered an unclean animal. Like there's not the logical, oh, for health reasons don't eat this. It's just don't eat it and don't hang out, don't deal with it just because. And it's kind of a weird chapter because there's lots of things that you can't eat. Like there's a distinction between split hooves and cleft hooves? I don't know. Chew the cud, not chew the cud. All these weird little requirements for what you can and cannot eat. And it's just very strange. I don't exactly know how to feel about chapter 11 of Leviticus, other than that it's really weird. Now the next thing I want to touch on is chapters 13 and 14 of Leviticus. I'm not really going to spend too much time on them, but it's really interesting because these chapters have to do with like skin diseases, health problems, and it's fascinating to watch how the Israelites, the Jews, dealt with things like leprosy. And like they practice like quarantining. Like if somebody has these certain symptoms, or these weird blemishes on their skin, they need to be quarantined. Or if they don't, then get them away. It's very interesting to see how they dealt with that back then, because there was no medicine back then. There was no science, and so it was all does this look like leprosy? Yes, it does. Go over there, see if time heals you. Or does this look like leprosy? No, it doesn't. It's just a rash. You're okay. You can go over there. Like that's kind of what the chapters 13 and 14 are like. And it's just fascinating to see how people had to deal with horrible things back then without any information. Chapter 15 has everything to do with, I don't exactly know what is meant by a discharge. I almost like at a certain point in this chapter, it's things are said about like if there's an emission of semen, but I don't know, like half of the thing is talking about just if a man has a discharge, but it doesn't specify exactly what that is. And then later it talks about an emission of semen, almost as if they're 2 separate things, or maybe the same thing but just said in a different way. I don't know, but this chapter, it's a little odd to me, only because, look, I grew up in the church, had a very religious background, and I remember in church, all these things are said about how sex is great in the right context, and it's a beautiful thing. It's not viewed as, disgusting or a bad thing, according to the Bible. And I always agreed with that. I think there is a context and a time for everything, and I think that context is marriage. But here, it just says things like, when a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, both must bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. It's almost implying that, like, sex in and of itself, while necessary, is not clean. It's I don't know. I mean, like, it goes on and on about that, and there's all these other things. Now, possibly for healthy reasons, these were, recommended, like, don't have sex with a woman while she's on her period. That seems like, probably a good idea. Probably not to have sex with somebody who's bleeding. But I know, like, this whole, like, it makes me call into question things like masturbation. Now, I've always thought masturbation is neither good nor bad. Porn is bad, but masturbation, the act in and of itself, I've never thought was like a bad act. But here, it talks later in verse 32 of chapter 15. These are the regulations for a man with a discharge, for anyone made unclean by an emission of semen. I've read the whole chapter in context now. Hopefully you've read the book, and I've also read this. I don't know where I'm going wrong here, but it seems like sex, it seems like basically having an orgasm at any time is unclean, and you have to, like, do something afterwards. Maybe I don't know. Maybe my interpretation of what unclean and clean means here is wrong. I'm almost viewing it as, you know, almost a distinction between right and wrong. If anyone out there who's more well versed on Levitical law, please leave any comments you have, you know, in the comment section below explaining this, because I don't fully understand it. I don't see how it you know, fits in with what I thought the biblical view of sex was supposed to be. Chapter 18 of Leviticus is another chapter I wanted to talk about. I'm going to read certain portions of this chapter because it's a very, very powerful and very, very important chapter. This has a lot, I mean, this whole chapter has to do with unlawful sexual relations. And so there's a couple verses in here that in today's time are extremely controversial. I will say though, there's really only one. Actually, not a couple. There's really only one, because most of this book is basically, most of this chapter is basically saying don't have sex with your family. Like, don't have sex with your mom, don't have sex with your father, don't have sex with your brother or your sister, or, like, you know, any close cousins or anything. And I think, at least I hope, most people would agree with that. Like, most of this chapter is entirely, I think, uncontroversial and terrific. It's basically saying just don't be disgusting. Don't have sex with animals. Don't do, you know, don't be, you know, depraved. Now, verse 22, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, it's a famous verse from the Bible regarding homosexuality. I'm going to read it. Do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman. That is detestable. According to the Bible anyways, homosexuality is a sin. You should not do it. I must say, and I've made this point before in some of my videos, anyone who says that the Bible doesn't say anything about homosexuality, they don't know what they're talking about, because it clearly does. Now, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it, you may have conflicting beliefs about it. You can either cut it out or leave it in, but the one thing you can't do is act like, or is lie and say that it's not in there. The Bible clearly does address this very, very controversial issue. Now, the only other part of Leviticus chapter 18 that I want to read is verses 24 to 28. I think this is really a timely passage to read from this book that came out, you know, thousands of years ago. So I'm just going to read it. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I am going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled, so I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you must keep my decrees and my laws. The native born and the aliens living among you must not do any of these detestable things, for all these things were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became defiled. And if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it vomited out the nations that were before you. Now, the reason I point out this passage and make it a you know, a big deal is look around. You know, if you're in America watching this, or pretty much anywhere in the Western civilization, we're going through some weird times now. There are people that think they're dragons, and there's a bunch of people that will say, yeah, you are a dragon. There are people that do engage in all sorts of really, really weird, very unhealthy things, very unhealthy sexual things, too. I think we can all agree that, you know, freaking the Dan Bilzerians of the world are not good. Well, I say we can all agree, but I don't know if that's even true. But, like, that kind of behavior only leads to ruin. I mean, it leads to temporary, like, awesome pleasure, but long-term negative consequences. And that kind of behavior, that kind of basically saying that you can do anything you ever have dreamed of sexually, I think is a big problem. And reading this here, when it says the nations that came before you, they basically fell because they became depraved in all these ways. They started having sex with different family members and all this stuff. You know, that may seem very far off for our culture today, and I certainly hope that it is, but I'm not entirely sure that it is as far off as we may think. The last time I watched pornography, I quit it in the last decade, in the 20-teens, but I remember seeing titles on those videos saying brother and sister has like, naughty sex or takes it hard, whatever it may be. And there was a lot of videos like that. And to act like that's not going to have any impact on people, I think is silly. And you see, even as great as the show Game of Thrones was until the last season, and even though it presented Jaime and Cersei's incestuous relationship as bad, not all the time. Not every single instance of their romance was presented as foul. There were times where you could just as easily think they were making the argument, love is love, right? Two people need to be together. Two people love each other, they need to be together. It was almost like they were like just introducing the idea. And, it's like nations have fallen in the past because the people becomes depraved. They don't have any standards, not even moral standards. And so nobody knows what's true. Nobody knows what's right or what's wrong. And so everybody just eats each other. And then somebody from the outside, some other nation, comes in and just ruins everything and takes you over. That's happened. It happened in Rome. It happened in all these different ancient civilizations. And in America, you could definitely make the argument we are going in that way. We are going in that direction because of all this stuff you see on TV or wherever it may be, basically saying, do as you please. I just wanted to point out that passage, 24 to 28, because, as I said earlier, I think it's timely. So chapter 19, I also want to go through verse 10. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. I think that's a beautiful verse. It's basically saying, look, let people that are less fortunate have what's left over. Verse 15, also fantastic. This should make a comeback, this verse, in today's world. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Verse 18, beautiful. I mean, most of this chapter is beautiful, but some of it's just like, it goes without saying. But I just want to point out, verse 18. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against any one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That verse is so hard to follow. It's so hard to follow. Man, when somebody burns me, I want to pour oil on them and set them on fire. Now, verse 19 is a collection of verses that, I don't know, it's a little weird. It says, keep my decrees. Do not mate different kind of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Perhaps the field thing is, just a good farming practice. Don't do two kinds of seed in the same place. Mating two different kind of animals. I guess ligers are not okay, which that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's not like if you breed a liger, it's not going to survive in the wild. The last one in verse 19, do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. That one's kind of weird to me because why? Why can you not wear clothing of two kinds of material? Like, I'm wearing denim, and it's not all denim. It's got some of these little golden strings here. I'm also wearing a white t-shirt. I mean, that's one of those Levitical laws that makes absolutely no sense. Maybe it's just a custom, just a cultural tradition, but, it's basically, it's a law, and I don't understand why it's a law. Maybe it's one of those laws that's not taken as seriously, but there's not necessarily an indication of that in here. There's nothing where it says keep some laws, very strictly, others, this is just a helpful recommendation. There's nothing like that in here. Verse 20, I've already kind of addressed slavery in the Bible in my past reviews, but it's an interesting verse. I don't really know what to think about it. Any Levitical scholars, let me know what it's supposed to mean and whether or not it kind of is an insult to the idea of women being equal. Then verses 23 to 25, I don't it's another Levitical law that just makes no sense to me. It doesn't, I just have weird feelings about it. I'll just read it. When you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years you are to consider it forbidden. It must not be eaten. In the 4th year all its fruit will be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the 5th year you may eat its fruit. In this way your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord your God. I guess, it's a tradition, a custom, a cultural custom, but it's like I just don't understand. Another law that I'm definitely, not adhering to, and while I know Levitical law, If you're a Christian, you're no longer under it. I don't know what Jews do about this, but if you're a Christian, you're no longer under it. Verse 27, do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. I've definitely clipped off the edges of my beard several times. Don't know why that's wrong. Don't know why. I don't see why there's a do not for hair. Verse 28 appears to be kind of saying tattoos are not so good. It says, do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I'm the Lord. I understand not cutting yourself, but tattoos, I understand, I've never had a tattoo. I don't really feel like getting a tattoo. I don't really care to put something on my body, but I don't really care if other people do it. And I don't really think it's a bad thing to do. And perhaps do not doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Just maybe it just means this is not recommended. But as I said with other verses in this chapter, it doesn't say that it's a recommendation. It's saying do not do it, as if it's in itself like a bad thing to do. Now this verse I love, verse 32, it's amazing. It says, rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord. Amen to that, seriously. Old people are smart. They're wise, and we should listen to them. We should not treat them like they're a nuisance or like they don't know things. They know much more than a guy like me knows. I'm 21 years old at the time of filming this. And I guarantee you, when I am 60 and I look back at myself now, I'll be like, oh, that poor guy that I once was had such a lack of understanding. And so, yeah, rise in the presence of the aged. Amen. Verse 33 also I think is beautiful. It says, when an alien lives with you in your land, do not mistreat him. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. That's something that that verse needs to be proclaimed from the heights. We need to love our neighbors as ourselves, even if they are not exactly like us. So Leviticus chapter 20 is one of those chapters of the Bible that people point to and go, see, that is the Old Testament God. That is God's wrath. That is the monster or whatever. And I can see why they think that, because a lot of the punishments in this chapter of the book are very, 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 very heavy, very harsh. And they almost all involve you getting killed. Verse 13, if a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. You may think that homosexuality is fine, or you may think that it's bad. Regardless, though, I feel like most people would agree that it's not okay to kill gay people. But clearly, at a certain time, when this was written, it was. So yeah, this chapter is, it's very conflicting to me. It's much of it I agree. I mean, I agree, if a man sleeps with an animal, that's illegal, that's wrong. I don't know if you kill them, though. If a man marries both a woman and her mother, it is wicked. Both he and they must be burned in the fire, so that no wickedness will be among you. I agree. That whole scenario is wicked, of a man marrying his a woman and her mother. I think that's disgusting, horrible. Should they be burned in the fire? No, I don't like that idea. But it seems like there's no footnotes here that say that this is not literal. So all I can assume is that yes, if this happened back then, people would get burned in the fire for it. I think prison would be good, but burning somebody at the stake, just being honest, I would not be down for that. I understand, it illustrates the severity of what God, these things are particularly abhorrent to him. Like having sex with an animal, particularly abhorrent to God. It's not what he wanted. And I understand, the penalty of death, that illustrates just how bad it is, just how much it hurts him to see that happen, for people to do that, to destroy his creation, to pervert his creations. I understand that. And I think a lot of people read this chapter as not necessarily, at least in today's time, as not saying to actually go out and kill people who do these certain things. But they view it as hey, here's what's right and wrong, and here's what is severe, and here is what is not quite as severe. But of course, that's our 21st century interpretation of this. Now, Leviticus chapter 24, verses 10 to 23. I'm not going to read the whole passage because it's it's a little long, but basically involves man blasphemes the Lord's name, and basically the townspeople they stone this guy. And there's also a passage in here talking about if anyone takes a life, their life must be taken from them, a tooth for tooth, bone for bone. It's basically that whole thing, like just, the punishment must fit the crime. If you steal somebody's ox, you get to lose yours. It's that kind of idea. I don't know, it's an interesting passage to wrestle with. I have to point out some of these passages that are difficult and that are uncomfortable, because it would be dishonest for me to not do that. For instance, Leviticus chapter 25, verses 44 to 46. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your own country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property, and you can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 1 through 8. I have to talk about it. It's, it may raise some hairs here, but it needs to be discussed because it seems it seems counter to what I have been told about the Bible in the past. It just doesn't seem right. It has to do with men and women and whether or not they were equal. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to dedicate persons to the Lord by giving equivalent values, set the value of a male between the ages of 20 and 60 at 50 shekels of silver, according to the sanctuary shekel. And if it is a female, set her value at 30 shekels. If it is a person between the ages of 5 and 20, set the value of a male at 20 shekels, and of a female at 10 shekels. If it is a person between 1 month and 5 years, set the value of a male at 5 shekels of silver, and that of a female at 3 shekels of silver. If it is a person 60 years old or more, set the value of a male at 15 shekels, and of a female at 10 shekels. If anyone making the vow is too poor to pay the specified amount, he is to present the person to the priest, who will set the value for him according to what the man making the vow can afford." Now, apart from just putting a price on the value of a person, which is, kind of a disturbing idea in and of itself, that does seem like what is happening here. And the reason I wanted to point this passage out is because of things like set the value of a male between the ages of 20 and 60 at 50 shekels of silver, according to the sanctuary shekel. And if it is a female, set her value at 30 shekels. So apparently, men are more valuable than women. That's what this passage seems to be saying. I mean, it goes from different age groups, and every single one of those age groups, men are they're valued more worth than women. I don't see another way to see that. It does not, I don't see a way out. It's putting a price on a person, basically saying how valued they are. 50, 30, okay? And it's, obviously, it's revolutionary for the time. It's revolutionary, at least, in that it's acknowledging that, yes, women have worth, but the matter of fact is it's saying that no, men and women are not, equal. That is a disturbing thing to read in the Bible. Scholars, Levitical scholars, biblical scholars, anybody out there who perhaps knows the answer, who could clear up these qualms and frustrations I have with this book and with this passage, please in the comment section below start some sort of discussion explaining this to me. I know, my initial impressions of Leviticus were it was not as scary or disconcerting as I had been told it was. And while I still stand by that, I can see how viewers of this review might think that it's, terrible just from what I read. But trust me, I assume if you stuck this around this far, you probably have read it. But if you haven't, please do give it a read and come up with your own ideas. I definitely pointed out, I guess, a lot more passages that were challenging to me, because there were a lot more passages that were challenging to me than were not challenging to me. But you must understand that I didn't read every single great verse, because there are a lot of great verses in Leviticus. I didn't point out every single great passage because some of those passages simply did not speak to me, because I've heard the messages before. If you walk away from this review with a very black view of this book, don't. It's very gray, is how I would describe it. So, ladies and gentlemen, have you read Leviticus? If so, please comment below and let me know what you thought of it. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to